Hello, everybody. Welcome to my channel for the Whiners live show for my pick, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. So, I guess first things first, I'd like to introduce that is Stephanie from Stephanie Bookish. Everybody will be linked in the description below. Hold on. I think that's a lie. But they will be in 5 seconds.
That's a lie.
It's okay, it's fine. We'll figure it out. Anyway, so let's figure out, I guess we can kind of go around and say what everybody rated it, and then we can kind of go on a brief synopsis, which I can do because it's my channel, maybe. And yeah, so we'll start with Stephanie, our guest of honor. What did you rate this book?
So I'm going to be transparent. I did not reread it, but when I read it the first time, I gave it a 4 stars.
Perfect.
Steph is like marking it off as like correct. Okay, next question.
No, I'm trying to add Stephanie.
Right? Yeah.
You just look like you're grading papers. You're like, yeah. Oh man, she's gonna fail this one.
Did not reread.
What'd you put for question 6?
I failed.
Oh my gosh. Okay, fair enough.
I'm not good at multiple choice.
Good.
Okay, Daryan, what did you give it?
Hi, I'm Daryan. I gave it 4.5 stars.
Cool.
Ta-da.
Cool.
Manda, what'd you give it?
Hello. Objectively, it's a 5-star, but for me and my taste and how I never read literary fiction, I gave it a 3.5.
Yeah.
But round it up.
And Rachel.
I gave it a 4 star.
Ooh, I guess I have the lowest rating here. I gave it a 3 stars. It's like, I was kind of in the same boat with Manda. I felt like it was a great book, but because it's not the style I'm used to reading, it was a little bit harder to get into. And I just did have a couple of issues with like the writing style and stuff, but like we can get into that a little later. So I guess we can go on a brief synopsis and what this is about. So it is about 2 sisters, both of whom ran away from their like childhood home. And oh yes.
Hello,
Lois.
Hope you're feeling better.
Okay. Lois could not be with us tonight. She wasn't feeling well, but she's here in spirit and also on her phone or computer. But this is also a really good picture of you, Lois.
I know. I was just
why have I never noticed that before? Okay, go off.
I think you changed your picture a little.
But I also think it's really hard on YouTube and stuff to see people's profiles because it's so small, and on this it makes it bigger. Like, and you're like, hello?
Like, who is this goddess? Like, hello.
I know.
Exactly.
Alrighty. So essentially what I was saying is that this is about 2 twin girls that ran away, and they ended up separating in their adult lives, and one of them moves back to their original hometown, and the other one moves forward with her life and passes as a white person, lives as a white person. And the other teen who goes back to her hometown is living as a person of color. And it is about them, but it's also about their 2 daughters and the journey that kind of the 4 of them are going on separately, but also kind of intertwining. And that's pretty much the gist of it, I feel. Does anybody have anything to add or?
Nope.
Okay, perfect.
And that's the end of the show. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye. We'll see you next time. So essentially, I guess we can just kind of start with like initial thoughts, like how like overall how we felt about it, just kind of in general. Stephanie, when was the last time you actually, like, when did you read this book?
A year ago. Like,
I think
I read it the end of January last year.
Oh, okay, perfect.
But I actually remember it really well. And I went and watched like somebody doing the synopsis of it, and I surprisingly remember everything.
Nice.
So for me, like, my 4 stars comes from the fact that I think some of the narrative structure didn't flow well enough for me. So that like threw me off. But I really liked the discussions of like racism and colorism, and like especially colorism, because I haven't read many stories that dive into that. And I also really liked our characters and like how they dealt with this, how they were raised, basically, because this town, like, everybody is literally trying to have children so that they're whiter than the last generation, or so I thought that was a really interesting conversation, and like how people dealt with how they were raised and how the twins specifically dealt with that. But my favorite character was the daughter. I'm forgetting her name now, but
Jude.
Yes, yeah. She was my favorite character, and I liked her relationship with her boyfriend a lot.
That is fair.
Yeah, that's like my favorite parts of the book were with her. But I also was like very interested in the sister that decided to pass as white, because her, like, the way that she justified things in her life was really interesting. Not necessarily in a good way. It was just really, I don't know. It was like kind of watching a train wreck.
Yeah, because it was like she really tried to like slip into that role, but because of her background, she was very hyper aware of certain things.
Yeah.
And then a little bit ignorant of things that came to light over the course of the story, where she kind of slowly realized where she was like, oh, I'm that white lady now.
Yeah, because she was trying to make that
like,
friendship with the black couple that moved into their neighborhood. And that's when I thought her story became really, really interesting, because the way that she was responding to that, into that friendship, and to the way that that neighbor responded to her, that was like the most compelling part besides Jude's stories for me.
See, I thought that she was kind of replacing her sister when that happened, like when she was trying to become friends with her. So
that's
I think there were some parts where she said like, oh, you really remind me of somebody. But she also, I thought it was really interesting that she basically just erased her entire family from existence in terms of whenever she spoke about anything, and that she would use the idea that they were poor to stop talking about it, because it was just considered like, oh, it's too much to talk about it, it's so taboo. Anytime her daughter would ask about it, she would say like, well, we were poor, so we didn't have it, so don't ask me about it. And anytime someone said, oh, don't you have family, and she was like, oh, they all died. Like, it was just a very abrupt full stop to the conversation, because she didn't even want to think about where she actually did come from, and then contend with her own identity problems, which I do agree. Honestly, the whole thing where she moved in and then she met the neighbor and she was like, we can't have these people in our neighborhood. I don't even remember anything from before that in the story, because I honestly feel like the rest of the story was where it really shone. And I found that really the most interesting, because that is when she's a fully realized adult, and yet she's not really a fully realized character yet. So she's grown enough to, I guess from our perspective in 2022, we would say like, you should know better. But at the same time, growing up and being 16 and then running away, or I think maybe they were 15 when they ran away. But the point being a young teen, running away, making up a whole identity for yourself, and then having that be a secret part of you that she would even keep hidden from her own sister, and then to be able to kind of rise in the ranks just because she was treated so differently based on something that, it is extremely significant in the time period that this book took place in. I thought was especially really interesting to follow.
I
Have
Yeah.
any? Sorry.
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just want to ask if any of y'all have read Passing.
No, not yet.
Okay,
haven't.
so this book is heavily influenced from that book.
Yeah.
Okay.
I definitely want to read that and watch the. Is it a movie?
Yeah.
Like a
Yeah.
movie? Yeah. Because I think I only started hearing about it pretty recently. I didn't realize that one was influenced by the other, but I also remember that you and I were talking and you said there was another book really similar to The Vanishing Half.
Oh yeah, the Silver Sparrows, the one who wrote An American Marriage, also wrote, I think, I don't know if that was their debut novel, but it was before An American Marriage. And I think Britt Bennett even says in the acknowledgments that she acknowledged the Silver Sparrow and Passing for like influencing this book.
Mm.
Yeah. Good source
I
material.
I was just gonna say that I struggled, I think, the most with Desiree when she was like at first, because I felt like her story kind of got sold short a little bit because we were just getting into her rediscovering herself back in her hometown, and then the story completely shifts, and
Yeah.
we move to Stella, and we get Jude and Kennedy, and while all of those people were definitely more interesting to read about, I feel like Desiree could have been more interesting if we had stayed with her a little bit and like learned a little bit more about her. I don't know. I just feel like she, out of the four characters, like the four main characters, I felt like she was the one that we got the least of, but I would have liked the most of, just because she was so interesting. Her story was so interesting, but I just feel like we did not get enough of her like present and future as opposed to the rest of them.
It's
Yeah,
almost
like
like a
that's-
circle style
Yeah.
Mm,
instead of like back and forth, which would have been nice to have
yeah.
perspective changes instead of like a chunk and then another chunk.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the problems I had too with like the narrative structure. I just wanted, instead of it to be like four separate stories, to be like kind of going back and forth between all of these characters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I struggled with the flow of it. Like it felt so choppy at some points because we were just in like the present, and then they would talk about the future, and then they would talk about the past, and everything would just, it was just very like disconnected for me when I was reading it. So that I struggled with a lot.
Yeah, I struggled with the timeline sometimes. Like I found that they would be in the present, then all of a sudden we'd be in the past, and it would be like the same paragraph, and I was just like, wait, where am I? So that just confused me. Like that's really the only problem I had with the book, was that sometimes I just did not know where we were.
Yeah. That was really difficult. There was also the part that I had been reading like mostly fantasy series and mostly like YA throughout the month of January. And then I hit an adult literary fiction and I was like, wow, this is a shift. Like I really have to adjust myself here because this is a lot. So I think that also played a little bit into why I found it slower at the beginning. But I was just like, this is a lot for me. I'm not having fun. What did we think about the town itself, like the town of Mallard, and how it was, they were just trying to like wash out color essentially out of their line? Like, what are we thinking about that?
I feel like it makes sense in terms of the fact that everyone in that town was aware of how poorly people were treated based on the color of their skin, and that much darker people were always treated worse.
Mhm.
And it is just a sense of colorism that exists in a lot of POC communities, because it is like an internalized kind of racism that is not even from the perspective of like, let me give my child a better life, but a lot of the times it's just literally internalized racism. And oftentimes it'll be like, don't marry this person with darker skin because then your kids will have darker skin babies, and that is bad. And they don't continue to carry it out where it's like, it is bad the way they will be treated. It's just like, it is bad. And I feel like it's like reading about that was very realistic, but also a bit sad, because you know that it's happening, and you know that especially for the time period that it was happening in, was something that was on everybody's minds all of the time. I mean, the main character's father is like literally killed like in front of them, I think, or at least like very close by. And so it's not like something that's a distant thought. And I think because of that, it's ingrained, especially in that community. But I also thought it was really interesting how the whole book ended, where they just were like, oh, actually, technically, Mallard is a village and not considered like a city enough. So then it was just kind of absorbed into something else. So that's kind of its own like vanishing in a way, for it to be brought into something else. But then people kind of just found I forgot the name of the actual place, but where Desiree worked. And that was kind of like the safe haven where everyone just kept kind of coming back around here. And they wouldn't even call it what the name was on the top of the thing. They would just call it Desiree's. So in a way, it was kind of like a legacy that was left behind. But at the same time, it's not one born out of wholesomeness either. It has its own fractured past and history. And then in the end, when Desiree ends up leaving, it's kind of just a mystery of what happens when she's gone, when she leaves. But, I mean, I think that was maybe symbolic in a way, because for so long when Kennedy was looking up what the name of the town was that her mother was from, because it was such a mysterious part of her mother's past that she refused to talk about, it wasn't a big name city. It wasn't easy to find. And there is a lot of struggle with trying to understand an identity that you don't have any access to at all. And it's completely against your will. You're unable to learn about it. And it's especially frustrating when it's like the person who could help you, your own mother, says like, no, I just refuse to tell you anything about it, and just invents a different life for herself. And I guess like the generational stress between somebody who maybe as a young person you can reinvent yourself over and over again, and we see that both in Stella and Kennedy, but there also is a certain amount of responsibility that you have as a parent, that it seems that you kind of need to pass certain things along to the next generation. But the question of how much do you pass along so as to give your child a better life and an understanding of who they are without also passing on generational trauma? Because we also see that Stella experiences the racism and colorism that she would have experienced as she was living her life like Desiree, but now is sort of on the side of the oppressor, but not quite, like a foot on either end. And also a sense of, I think a very different sense of sexism than any other person of color would have experienced in her workplace that wasn't passing, because I forget exactly like each of the moments, but there was certain things where she would say, like, if I forgot what her last name was. It was like Vens or Viens or something like that. But she would say, like, at work, I'm like Miss Viens. But if I looked darker, then people would just call me like something different. They wouldn't let me, eat over here. I would have to eat all my stuff out of like the back area where I can go and pick things up. There's still like the colored side of the pool versus the white side of like so many different locations that we went over, but I only remember the pool and like the food spot right now. But it was so obvious, because everything was still segregated then, that it was an easy choice for a more privileged life, that if you have the opportunity to go for it. But it still creates such a huge disparity between the previous generation and the next one, to have like jumped basically from one side of the oppressed to the oppressor, among other things, but those total different racial identities. And then, the frustration of, can I pass this along? Should I not? What should I do? And the person being passed along saying, I wish I had more information. Why won't you just tell me? I can handle it, whatever it is. So I think for me, that's what I really enjoyed about it, because there is a sense of this that is very realistic to me, that I'm sure that this is something that plenty of people have reckoned with, but it's just a very vanished story, if you will. It's not one that we talk about very often because it is pretty unusual, but the stress between those generations, I think, especially, it's always difficult to know what information to give, what information you actually do want, and
Oh.
He was like, I've had enough of trying to educate you guys on leaving.
She's like, anyways, you'll never know.
Anyway,
We got us hooked on her every word and then was like, bye.
I know. I know. We were like, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my
How
god.
did you feel about Desiree going back to where she came from when she knew that it would cause harm to her own daughter? Like, how do you feel about her subjecting her daughter to the same things she went through? You know what I mean?
It's so hard because, like, I don't think there's, like, should she have done that or shouldn't she have done that? Like, I understand her wanting to go back where she came from, and I think she knew, like, what that would mean for her daughter and how her daughter would be treated. So it's like, in that sense, like, should she have done that? I don't know, but, like, I can't blame her for wanting to go back to where she came from. So, like, there's so many parts of the book where I'm like, I don't know, should they? I don't know. That's something. Hello, Rachel.
Yeah.
Hey.
Oh.
She said, never mind.
It's like, wait. You thought. Yeah. Oh. Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Hello. I'm so sorry. My Wi-Fi died the first time, and then the second time I accidentally hit leave. So I just left immediately. I'm very sorry.
No, that's okay. I honestly thought you were just like dramatic affecting it.
My Wi-Fi is really bad.
You really got us on every word there.
It's just like, you'll never know.
No.
So we were talking about Desiree, and Manda posed the question of should she have brought her daughter back there, knowing that it was going to be very difficult for her and knowing the childhood she would have. So we were talking about that. Do you have any thoughts, Rachel?
The question was, should Desiree have brought up Jude the way she did?
Like,
Is that the
take her
question?
back to her hometown where she knew that she was going to be treated a lot differently than the rest of the kids because she was a lot darker.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, should she have done that? Should she have gone somewhere else, kind of thing? What's your thought?
I mean, I guess I think of it as there's only really so much safety that you can give your child, because once you've decided to have a kid, you're putting them out in the world, and unfortunately, you can only protect them from so much, and you're not exactly 100% responsible for all of the good or bad things that happen to them. But to some people, there is a really significant part of your life that exists where you come from, and the need to understand that sometimes outweighs the potential trauma that you can experience. And it's a very complex thing, because I never would want to say it's worth it to do A if you get, like, it's worth it to do X if you get trauma, because usually it's not. But also at the same time, it's kind of a thing that I think her mother experienced and was somewhat aware of, to a degree that she was like, I think this is important for you personally to understand where you come from, where I come from, and to not hide this part of her at all. And understanding that she was not going to be treated as well. It is like, you know, I guess, I don't know. I guess it's just one of those things where you can't really protect your kid anymore, and you just have to let things be what they are. But it's always going to be very difficult as a parent to watch your child struggle in any way. I don't know. What was
For sure.
everyone else's thoughts on it?
I basically said the same thing in a much less eloquent way. So
I mean,
Well,
pretty much,
I'm bullshitting, so I hope.
you're like
I
this
honestly barely
character.
remember. I barely remember the part where she went back. I just remember that she did go back, and there was like she wanted to go to different schools, and her mom was like, "But you should go to Mallard."
oh yeah.
I remember
But I
that.
don't remember. I don't remember if Desiree ever talked about it directly to Jude in the book.
I don't remember.
I feel like no. There
Because
weren't.
I think she
direct
didn't explicitly.
I don't
Yeah,
think
I think a lot of like the symbolism in the book is not, or I guess symbolism, quote unquote, is like not very explicit.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is more of the characters and the way that they develop over time and seeing the impact from one generation to another. And I think that's kind of why we jump back and forth, although it is very confusing. Sometimes I would start reading about someone and I'd be like, okay. And then I would be like, we aren't reading about who I thought we were. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
confused. Because I thought they were still in school. And now I'm reading about an actress. What's going on?
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
I mean it's obviously more of a character study than it is like an actual like full-blown intentional plotted novel. Like we have obviously the plot there, but it's so very clearly a character study of these four women. But I was so confused, especially when we had that weird part with Kennedy and she was this actress in a soap opera for like 3 seasons and then she was no longer in it anymore and she was like 40.
Wasn't it like her character got killed off, but not really? Like she just like was in the ocean, she just waved, and then everybody was like, yeah, like her character was just like left on a boat, and then she was like, "This is the worst thing that's ever happened to anyone." I'm like, honey, you're in a literary fiction novel. Like,
honey,
this is like the
He's
least
got a
bad.
big storm coming.
Yeah, no, she was, and then she just wouldn't let it go, and I was like, "What is happening? What is the point of that?"
I guess she, in a sense, I could understand that. Actually, you know what? I think an actress is the perfect role for Kennedy because she was acting her whole life as an actress and she didn't really know who she was. She always was wondering more about her past. And for somebody who never gets answers to that, it's sometimes easier to just invent your own. And that could be why she was generally good at what she was doing. But from a, analyzing the book for symbolism way, maybe the reason that she wasn't necessarily particularly successful was because she wasn't really grounded enough. And she was just constantly jumping from one thing to the next to reinvent herself in different ways. And she kind of never could even decide if this is what she wanted, even with her relationship with her boyfriend. I forgot his name. Was it Paris? I think was his name.
Reese? No. That was
Kennedy's. I think his name was Paris.
France.
Oh, France. Okay. I knew it was a place. But that makes more sense. But she even was like, oh, I always knew I would leave him. I was just waiting for like a certain day and it would tell me the answer on what to do. And it was kind of like, a constant wandering feeling that you never feel secure enough to trust anybody to have that long-term commitment or something with them, or a long-term commitment to your own dreams and your own life, because she was so listless and wondering what the truth was. But she comes from the previous generation of someone who was also acting her entire life, and her whole life basically depended on it. So I think that is a really interesting choice that Britt Bennett made here. And I think it's especially evident when Jude and Kennedy meet and Jude finally reveals kind of who she is. And that just sticks with Kennedy, and she constantly is thinking like, oh, Jude has, this kind of life and this is everything that she has that I don't have. And she becomes very jealous about certain things without really understanding all of the other baggage that comes with living the sort of life that she thought that she wanted.
Mhm.
And even then she would still make, so many comments here and there that showed that she didn't really quite understand. Or she would say things like, when I think she met with Jude and she was like, oh, like, you're really lucky because usually like guys like your boyfriend won't stay with like people like you. And she's like, what do you mean? And she's like, oh, it's just the way that they are, like, ha 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 ha. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
honey, wait a
Yeah.
minute.
Yeah.
But
It's-
I think it is, common of a person in her standing who was basically raised 100% white to have lost sight of a lot of the things that somebody else who was like basically on the same exact playing field as her, like cousins, but they would have experienced the same thing if they had just stayed in the same town, probably,
Yeah.
just by family relation.
Although I do wonder if that's like a commentary on identity in general of especially mixed race people, because like her mom never became grounded in her identity. And I think that's an interesting, like Rachel and I have actually talked about this because we're both mixed race. And like there's always this question of identity when you feel like you're not enough of one thing or the other. And although Kennedy didn't know that about herself, I think that she witnessed her mom struggling with that her entire life and like obviously lying about a lot of things. But when somebody came into her life that reminded her of her sister, she started to kind of reevaluate her identity and like everything that she left behind. And that's a big reason I do think that Jude was raised in Mallard, is that I think her mom did believe that it would give her a sense of identity and that it would be easier for her to live there with people. While they definitely fall into colorism and internalized racism, like part of me thinks she thought it would be easier than being among primarily white people, if that makes sense.
And also, like, I think from starting at basically like a blank slate, because you would just have to leave everything behind. And at least, even if you are experiencing horrible things, you have your family to commiserate with and your community to commiserate with. But, having left that entirely behind for the sense of freedom to take on the white privilege that comes with passing, there are certain things that you leave behind that you cannot get back, that you cannot have. You can't have it both ways.
Well, and especially a sense of identity, because if you, like you said in the beginning, a big part of where you're raised is a big part of your identity.
Yeah.
And I think that like when they came back to Mallard, it was her mom finally saying that I'm accepting my identity and who I am and the choices that I've made to this point. Whereas her sister refused that. Like she refused to be grounded in her identity and tried to take on a whole other persona. And you see cracks in that persona. And I think that's really reflective of the listlessness in Kennedy and how she's never grounded in anything in her life because she was raised by somebody that was never grounded in their own identity and being comfortable with themselves and being comfortable with their position in society. And I think that's really an interesting conversation of like identity and colorism and how that can really affect generations and cause trauma. Like Rachel was saying, like, I think at the end of the day, they all were dealing with this generational trauma, especially the way that they were raised in Mallard, where internalized racism was that's what every generation was dealing with. And they had no ways of coming to terms with that and like combating those feelings because that is like the identity of the town.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you all think of the scene when Jude actually confronts Stella outside of the theater?
It was a lot. Like,
okay.
Right?
I mean, I just couldn't. I mean, I understand why she did it, but there was just a lot where I was stressed for her, and I was because you never know how somebody's going to react, like when they're put in that situation. So I felt so stressed for Jude in that particular sense, but I was kind of glad that she kind of put Stella on the spot and was like, okay, here, like this is, I know who you are hiding, but like you need to tell somebody because this is driving everybody insane. But it was a stressful and a very tense scene in the book.
Yeah.
I liked that it was a very quick, I guess maybe not quick, but like a powerful confrontation, that it wasn't like teased out over the course of like weeks and years and months or anything like that, but it was just kind of like it's a now or never moment. Because I think it was something that was going to affect them for a long time, and I wanted to see how that would play out once all the cards were basically on the table, because the fact that she was kind of keeping up this sort of like secret friendship or something with Kennedy without revealing who she really was.
Yeah.
I thought it was so interesting because you kind of already saw the way that Kennedy would treat her without knowing that they were related. And I think that because of their way of thinking as sort of like integrated white people, the idea of being related to Black folks was more insulting to them than an idea of like, oh, I have this other part of my family. It was more of just like, what do you mean? Like, no. And I think that's partially why they were also very rejective of it, because it was just too difficult for their minds to contend with, because the entire area that they live in is also entirely racially segregated. And so the ideas of not just saying this is a past that I come from, but this is something that directly affects me now, this is who I could be if anything was differently, and then look at how differently my life would be, not just like I wouldn't live in this nice house, but also like if today my life changed, I wouldn't be allowed to sit here. I wouldn't be allowed to do this. I wouldn't be able to work that job. And I think that was also just something so like violently difficult for them to contend with for their own personal identities. And that's why they were not able to, greet any of this with like a warm welcome, which of course is painful because from Jude's perspective, it's the idea of kind of wanting to understand this family. And I mean, they had someone hunting Stella down just to find out where she was, and she had so thoroughly disappeared that it was impossible to find her. And then just kind of by chance, not quite, then running into Stella outside of the show and finally seeing her, for Jude is like, I'm meeting this person I've heard about my entire life, and I want to know them. And so it's kind of those two things meeting at once for both people. And I really like that this book analyzed that. I would have probably liked a bit more of it, just to tease it out in more depth for each person, because I do think some of it is left at the surface for you to extrapolate to a certain point. But I mean, I think that their meeting is really where things sort of ricochet out of, maybe not out of control, but I mean, everyone very vastly just breaks apart from one another. And I think they really have to think more deeply about their own selves.
Yeah. So, what did we think of like the side characters? Like, did we have a favorite or least favorite?
Reese.
Yeah, Reese is my favorite character.
I thought it was interesting, the parallels between him and Stella.
Yeah.
Like what?
Like their experience was entirely different, but you can create some similarities, that it's almost like she had her false identity and he was getting his identity,
Oh. I didn't think of it that way.
I've never thought of that. It's cute. I really liked Loretta. I thought she was a great character.
Who's that again?
The like next door neighbor of Stella.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yes,
I really like her.
Yes.
Loretta.
I thought we would see her again. but we didn't.
I think that was I'm kind of glad we didn't see her again, because I feel like the way that their friendship ended and then not really being able to see each other again kind of makes more sense. Just given like how it fell out and the time period in which it fell out. I feel like it was more realistic to just have them kind of like 1 minute there, 1 minute gone kind of thing. I wish she was in the story more. Like, I wish we had her more, but like, I think it's very realistic to like what actually happened between them.
Especially because it's so similar to her and her sister's relationship, where like every person that she gets close to, the more she denies her identity and like who she is, everybody that ever gets close to her, she just pushes away. And I mean, that's even evident with her husband as well. They don't really have that great of a relationship.
No.
And I think that's really interesting how she sucks at relationships, because she can't reconcile things within herself and her own person.
Yeah. And I think that carries on again to the next generation too, because I remember when Kennedy and France was his name, were hanging out with Jude and Reese. And then I think that was just when like Jude was in town in New York. And then they were like, oh, like, let's hang out. Oh my gosh. And Kennedy was like, no, but cool. Like, they hung out at a bar for like 2 seconds and they were like, all right, we have to leave now. And then France was like, oh, your friends are nice. And she was like, they're not my friends. And he was like, oh, I should have known you don't have Black friends. And then that's kind of like the whole like, oh, okay. And then kind of also realizing like, oh, Jude's just here to make my life worse, and she's just here to rub it in my face. And meanwhile, Jude and Reese were only there for Reese's surgery. So it was like, oh, I was literally just in town. Like, cool that you, like, sorry you're so obsessed with me, but literally, I'm living my life in New York. So yeah. I really liked their dynamic, I think, because it's sort of more reflective at this point. It was near the end of the story, so you kind of understood everything that happened in the previous generations to a degree, and then seeing how fractured these two sides of the family had become that had begun so close together, because it's literally two identical twins, and then how like their family lineage is now so vastly different, and being able to kind of see parallels between them and their mothers. And I really did feel bad kind of for everybody, because I think that none of them really ever got what they wanted from their family. With the exception of maybe like Desiree and Jude kind of had, what they needed from each other, but they were always sort of missing Stella and the rest of her family.
That is true. Any other major thoughts before we wrap up? This is a very like wild story. Like, so much happened, but then we get to a discussion and it's like, so what happened? Like, what can we talk about? Like,
well, it's kind of heavy.
It is. It's really heavy. It just it was a good book. I would recommend it to people, but I forget a lot about it. There was so much happening. I find it was a difficult time at moments to understand, but
did it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it doesn't really have a particular. Wait, what?
I was just gonna, because I'm trying to remember. Does it end with Stella leaving Desiree again? Is that how it ends?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like Stella goes back, visits her mom, visits Desiree, and then is like, "Hey, can your daughter stop following my daughter? Also, I'm leaving in the middle of the night. Bye." And that was like, that was it.
We haven't. No one mentioned early before. I also love Early.
Early, he was cute. I never understood his like whole thing in the beginning, like with his like jobs where he was like searching for her, like that
Priscilla?
was Early was like a hitman kind of guy.
Priscilla.
Yeah. So I never understood that aspect of it. I feel like it was wrapped up really quick
That was an interesting choice.
with very
That was a really interesting choice where it was like, this is literally just a hitman.
yeah, and
Like-
then we have nothing else about it. It's just like there's a hitman, and then at the end his boss dies. And
Yeah.
that's it. And I was like, okay,
Oh, I forgot about that.
wild. Like that's a choice. But I like Early. He was like
Yeah.
he was a sweet guy.
Yeah.
And he was sweet. I liked him.
He was good.
He
There
was-
weren't any characters.
I mean, I
that-
feel like in general, it's hard to say like, this is. Wait, what? Hello?
I think you're like behind us a little bit.
yeah, I think you're behind a little.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Say it's like I
My
don't
phone keeps like sometimes like freezing, and I just need to like hold it. So.
fair.
That's okay.
I don't think there are a lot of unlikable characters, is what I was gonna say. I think everybody's like
Mhm.
very like morally gray or like likable, but there's not really anybody I like hate besides like the guy that was abusing Desiree and like there were a couple moments with Kennedy where I was like, girl, but like overall, I don't think anybody was like hateable in the story. I think everybody was like everybody had something redeeming about them.
Yeah.
Which I liked. So that's good. Good.
I really like that their flaws were really like front and center. Hello?
Yeah.
Oh my god. I'm so behind.
Hello.
Oh. I feel like it's fine to wrap this up now. Yeah, so we can kind of go around and say what our next picks are for the next 4 months because that's important stuff to know. So I think next month is January. No, it's not. It's February. And
It's this one.
I know. Yeah.
There it is.
There she is.
Stunning.
A
She
beautiful moment.
is beautiful.
But also, I didn't realize. Oh,
She's thick. Yeah. Yeah. I got it yesterday and I was like, hello?
I'm excited though.
Yeah.
It's like it's not gonna feel like that. She's such a good writer. Like you're gonna be like, oh my god, it's over already. What the hell? Like she's so good, so good.
I'm
I'm so excited. What's your pick, Daryan?
My pick in March is what's it called? It's The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave.
The last.
Oh, I'm excited for that one.
I'm really pumped for that one. I've heard only good things about it.
Me too.
Rachel, I love the angle of your
Yeah, you kind of look like you're like mid thirst trap.
or looking down on us.
I'm literally just typing on my computer to be like, what's the name of the thing? But it's not coming up. All right.
My
Well,
book
all
is
of my internet is out.
awesome.
Oh gosh.
What do you remember what your book is called, Rachel?
I do. I just don't remember the author's name, but the book is The Lighthouse Witches.
Let's see if I can
And
find the author.
yes, some hacker voice, get in there.
CJ Cook.
Is it CJ Tudor?
CJ Cook.
CJ Cook.
Oh, hold on. Yes, CJ Cook.
Yeah, boy.
And
Sasha.
I'm reading. Hold on. Is it? Oh,
I'm so scared.
oh.
From Blood and Ash.
Thank you.
I have a poppy candle right here.
Yeah, we're gonna read From Blood and Ash by
Oh
Jay.
boy.
She's stunning.
Rachel's face right now.
And also the candle behind it's also from Blood and Ash related. So you know I'm a stan. Okay. Don't come for me.
It's gonna be it's gonna be so good. The conversation is gonna be great.
Oh
10 out of
boy.
10.
There's-
The conversation will be great. The conversation.
I think the book is gonna be great too.
I'm so scared.
I will fight to death.
Oh my gosh.
I literally texted Manda first.
I
I was
will
like,
too.
"Do you mind reading this again?" And she was like, "Girl, would I mind?" I was like, "Okay."
Oh my god.
And after that, it's Book of Night.
Steph, what's
by
your book
Holly
club
Black.
pick?
Yeah.
I said it was Matilda.
Oh.
Oh.
That's
By
so
Roald
Miss
Dahl?
Trunchbull
Love that.
in the house.
It's only because I'm wearing this one. This is the trench ball.
There it is. There she is.
There she is.
I need to rewatch that movie. That was such a good movie.
Yeah.
Love that.
10 out of 10.
10
The
out of
cake scene.
Ugh.
Iconic.
Cinematic history.
Unmatched.
All right. I'm gonna end this broadcast. I now have everybody tagged in the description, so please go subscribe to everybody. And thanks for coming. And I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.